Hello. Now, I was prompted quite recently to look into something I knew very little about. This was a prompt that came through the Cross Stream Life forum, and it was on the subject of squaring the circle, a mystical practice of alchemy, if you like, a sort of inner transformation of combining the masculine and feminine that um, the thread was pointing to the teaching, the ways of a number of mystics, especially from the Christian tradition. So I thought I would have a little look into this and share a little what I have discovered. It's something I didn't know very much around. It seems it's not just Christian mysticism, but quite a long-standing idea. So the idea about the quest for the philosopher's stone, this kind of ultimate mystery of coming into wholeness, has been there pretty well, it seems, since at least the time of the so-called Hermetic writings, Hermes being a mythical character whose influence has had an impact on Western philosophy, and it seems actually some mystic and esoteric traditions as well. And certainly this concept comes through other mystical lines as well. The idea that there is what's called the great work. This is something that anyone that's on a spiritual quest, indeed, those of a spiritual background, the teachers would argue anyone who's on a human journey would want to pursue ultimately, this idea of a union of opposites and also coming into oneness or wholeness with the divine. And this process is also described as a uniting of the opposites. So soul with God, ego with non-ego, the reconciliation of the conscious and unconscious, or perhaps different levels of consciousness within. So how we come ultimately to fully realize our potential as an integrated divine or spiritual being. And among the motifs that are used in mysticism, there's the idea of the masculine principle being described as the Christ logos, and the feminine as the divine Sophia. So these are kind of getting us into the territory of archetypes, really. Perhaps I'll come back and have a word to say on that in a future video. So in Christian tradition, we see people like Meister Eckhart and Julian of Norwich and Francis of Assisi, perhaps three of the better known mystics who spoke about this kind of union and this kind of work, and certainly were very comfortable with the idea of masculine and feminine energies or principles being not only being present within every person, but actually, if we are to ultimately complete this so-called great work, to complete this union, come into our own divinity, as it were, our own union with God, then we need to go through the process of integrating these two. So for someone who has a curiosity about why someone like me has masculine and feminine within, this is actually something that fits really very well with my own spiritual journey. I realize we're talking about concepts here that aren't going to land with everybody very well, especially if you don't have a faith tradition of your own. So in some traditions, the square represents what's seen as material, earthly, and, as it were, the masculine principle, while the circle symbolizes the spiritual, heavenly, and feminine. The mystical path involves, as it were, both conquering and integrating these aspects, and not seeing them as being in competition to one another, but totally complementary. There's also in some traditions the idea that the masculine is representing the will and the feminine love. There are other associations, different metaphors associated with this as well. one online blogger that I came across. Now, this is actually from rather occultic writing. It's not my usual area that I would go into. This is the teaching of Thelema, which actually I believe was established by a somewhat controversial, what's the word, occultist, Aleister Crowley. This is on the theme of squaring the circle, but I think actually the words here, whatever you think of that background, and I know very little about that, it's something I've tended to steer clear of actually, but there may well be some wisdom there that we're missing. These are words that I came across in this blog. There is nothing but this drive to unite opposites. It is the libido, which operates on a horizontal and vertical level. This concept translates to every single plane. To focus on the square, or the plane upon which you reside, is horizontal, but to focus upon the circle, which is the quest for our opposite within, in other words, the great work, is to rise vertically. And that actually chimed with me, the idea of Kundalini, this energy, this latent power within us, rising within, and perhaps the power of Eros, again, the energy, the power that comes with that, as something that can rise up and within, as it were, the vertical of the body, and being something that leads to certainly in the context of a sexual relationship, so-called mystic union, which may be a glimpse of enlightenment. And that got me asking the question, well, does this idea of mystic union, a kind of ecstatic feeling that two people may have at the sort of climax of a physical sexual encounter, but in other circumstances as well, it might be something that's experienced on the birth of a baby, for example, or moments of great awe and wonder, where there is a sense of transcending your own sense of self. Something that's quite difficult to describe unless you've experienced it, and perhaps for most of us, sadly, is a fleeting experience when it comes. But it got me wondering whether it's necessary to be in a partnership with another person for that. Now, I have for quite some time believed that the answer there is absolutely no, that particularly for, like me, you're on a spirit, you consider yourself to be on a spiritual journey, it is your journey. And yes, people who may be people very close to you, they may be a partner if you're in a partnership, can act and often do act as a mirror and can complement or point out perhaps things that different energies, if you like, or different characteristics within yourself that aren't fully integrated. So a lot of work around the so-called shadow there can benefit, of course, by what we see as being mirrored in other people, telling us about what's going on internally. But it's very much the case in Christian mystical teachings as well that being in a human sexual partnership is absolutely not necessary to mystic union, and therefore for integrating masculine and feminine. Indeed, most mystics like Meister, Eckhart, Catherine of Siena, and so on, would teach that this integration process is very much an internal thing for each individual, and that we are to integrate our divine masculine and feminine within. It's a kind of inner alchemy, if you like, an overcoming, a coming together of these polarities. So a few thoughts there on this idea of squaring the circle. I've not read in detail around this yet, but certainly it's quite a common theme that comes through certain esoteric writings and certain Christian writings, and the likes of Meister Eckhart I'm relatively familiar with, also with Julian of Norwich, some very beautiful and inspiring writing. So some food for thought there, that integration is very much about what happens within, and both masculine and feminine coming together, and this idea of the square and the circle, I kind of like as a metaphor. Not that I fully understand it, but that we're kind of overcoming or at least transcending polarities.